All right, so we are back and recording. And we're going to move on and look at what is actually probably my favorite Viking Age weapon combination, which is spear and shield. And certainly, I mean, throughout history, spear and shield is probably the most common weapon combination, really until you get to the early, or the high Middle Ages, and you get to really comprehensive armor. Around, when I say highly comprehensive armor, I mean like around the world. Like you look at what the Japanese were doing. About the same time they started to develop really comprehensive armor, and so relied much more on archery than on like spear and shield. But yeah, it's certainly in the Viking Age, it was a very, very common weapon system, and I think it's also kind of one of the more neglected ones. But I really like it. It's really fun. It's cool. So basically with the spear, there's two grips, what I term the overhand and the underhand. So overhand, if I hold my hand out just in neutral, if the spear tip is above my hand or is over my hand, that's an overhand grip. And if it is under my hand, this in the same position, it's an underhand grip. I think there are sports that I don't really know about because I'm very nerdy, where it's like overhand and underhand are opposite. But for my purposes, I want to talk about the spearhead relative to the hand. So overhand and underhand, and upsetting your landlord. All right, so let's start with the overhand grip. In the overhand grip, I come on guard with my shield in a regular position, and I have two guards that I can hold. Guard one is the low guard, guard two is the high guard. So basically in the low guard, I just sit here with my hand on my hip. I want to make sure that the tip of my spear is only a little bit in front of the rim, maybe, no more than like whatever that is. And the reason for that is on the subject of things you can't do, or things that are easily beaten once people know to look for them. If I do this, which is very natural, I see a lot of people who've experimented with spear and shield doing this. It's very, very easy for an opponent with any other weapon to knock my spear down under my shield and then aggressively bind. And if my spear is knocked down, one of two things will happen. One, I will be bound, like someone will just crash into me, because they've got very good control of my weapon, because this being very, very long, a very long weapon means that any leverage applied to the tip is quite strong, and I will be bound and killed very quickly. And when I teach this stuff in person, I drill how to do that as like the first lesson, because it stops people from holding the guard wrong, and gives them a huge advantage when they fight other people who who do spear and shield. Well, thing number two is I will spend so much time untangling myself and recovering that I will be very vulnerable and basically unable to do anything else. Neither of which are things I want. So you want to keep the spear tip behind, just on the rim of the shield, or even behind. I know some people who say you should have the spear tip entirely behind, but I'm lazy and let it creep out. This does cost you a degree of reach. But as you get better and better at using your spear, you can hold it further and further back. Some people hold it like all the way back here and just have this guard as their guard. Although if you're doing this, you need to keep the spear moving, because otherwise your arm will get tired. But also if you're doing this, you've got such long reach that constantly harassing your opponent is a really, really useful thing to do. But I'm going to hold it about here just for demo purposes, because I need to hold it more statically than I would in a fight. All right. So when you get to the high guard, same basic deal. You don't want to be out here because you will get knocked down and bound. You want to be basically here, high, sitting with your spear tip on the rim of your shield. And from here, the attacks are fairly simple and fairly obvious. I extend my hands together, much like the counter hit we saw with sword, and thrust. So thrust, thrust. that was embarrassing. Thrust, thrust, thrust. And you notice that I'm doing this on a lunge. Basically, the spear thrusts are nearly always done with front foot movement. It's very, very rare that I do a full pass with the spear. Mostly the reach means I don't necessarily need to, and it's more useful in spear and shield to move the front foot to get an angle on my opponent than it is to kind of get the extra reach of doing a full pass forward. And so even from the high guard, what I'll be looking to do is compass my foot and come out to an obscure angle. And I also find from here, stepping sideways and coming with my hand quite high, just extending it forward over the top of my opponent's shield can be quite effective just as an opening movement. So from here, and I can also use the back, I can also compass the back leg, same way as we saw with, you know, the counter attacks from sword and shield. I can do the exact same thing with spear and shield. I compass the back leg and I gain an angle and come in. But I'm never, my legs are never really my feet never pass each other. I'm never doing this. I'm stepping probably, you know, even just to a wider stance, and then coming back to a narrow stance to get an angle on my opponent. So doing, you know, this. Compass. 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 And compass. All right. So that's kind of the basic attack. And what I do with my spear and shield is I use those in combination, my spear and shield in combination to open my opponent up. So I might, you know, throw an attack to get my opponent to move. I bind with my shield and stab them again with my spear. The other thing you do with this is just snipe, just use your incredible reach to hit your opponent from miles away. Because if you're light on your feet and you've got a spear, you can basically just frustrate the hell out of anyone with a shorter weapon. The other thing, the other two attacks, or the other attack that's really good with a spear, is straight down into the leading leg. And I can even let my spear slide a bit. And the key to this is I never fully let go. I loosen my grip, so this is a loose grip, but I still have control. And at any point, I can pinch to maintain control of the spear. I know, like, a lot of people from a reenactment background will feel like that's a very dangerous thing to do because the spear can bounce anywhere. Realistically, if it's going to bounce somewhere else, it's never going to bounce into you or into a friendly. It's probably going to, you know, if it's going to bounce, it's going to bounce somewhere else on your opponent. But even then, once you practice, the more you practice it, the more control you get with doing that, and the easier it becomes to control the spear as you do it. But the advantage of this is I go for the leg, and some people will instinctively drop their shield, in which case I can still kind of hit them in the shin because the shield's never going to get low enough. Alternatively, even if they do get their shield low down enough, I can then use that to come in and basically bind down on both their weapons and come in over the top. So just practicing leg thrust, leg thrust, leg thrust, leg thrust, leg thrust, and leg thrust. Right. Cool. The other attack type thing you do with the spear in the overhead grip is you shorten. So let's say, for the sake of argument, you're facing someone who's got a sword, they aggressively bind and come in, you're choking each other up with your shields. I just let the spear drift down to my hand, and all of a sudden I've got basically a clumsy knife. And so now I can come around and stab very, very close. And what I actually found with spear is, weirdly, it's obviously very good at long range, as you'd expect. It's also really good at short range. If someone comes in and rushes into you, and they're like, you know, our shields are pressed together, doing this means I've got a very quick, short, stabby weapon that can come around. I've basically got a clumsy knife. And that's and when you're in close, it's a really effective thing to have. I think there's some old footage of me doing spear and shield versus sword and shield, my friend Eric. And basically what we found at the end of that process, I think the filming comes from the start of our experimentation, but by the end of that process, what we discovered was that the sword had to stay, like you couldn't, if you clinched with the spear and shield, you had the advantage. And if you could keep the sword, like the person with the sword far back enough, you had the advantage because you're off his reach. And so it had to kind of come to this middle distance, which was awkward to maintain, but super freaking deadly if they got once they got there. And so the whole fight turned into this jockeying for position where the spear and shield would move back and forward to either keep at long reach or come in and choke and close. And the person with the sword would basically have to react to that and try and take advantage of a misstep. It's cool. All right, so now let's look at the underhand grip. Incidentally, the way I'm shifting my hand, when I want to change grips, I don't want to do this stuff where I throw the shield spear up in the air like it's a movie. I think it's one of the movies about ancient Greece where you see that a lot. What I do is I shift by moving my fingers individually, and I always keep contact with my palm. And if I have to roll the spear down to maintain contact, like from here, I'm not letting the spear fall. I'm bringing my hand over the top to move it a bit faster. But I always keep contact with the palm, and I move. And the best way to practice this is move the fingers round individually. And that stops or minimizes the chances of me dropping my spear in a shift when I shift grips. The other thing it does is it makes the shift a lot quicker. Like, this is a lot quicker than that. So let's practice that a bit. If you've got a stick at home or you've got a spear, shift. And just fingers around. The reverse is a bit frustrating, but shift and shift. And it's perfectly fine to snatch downwards when you do the reverse, but you have to keep contact. Make sure you're keeping contact with the spear. Don't let it drop. I also tend to do this instinctively because I primarily fight out of this guard and a high underhand guard. And then, of course, I dropped my spear, which I knew was going to happen. All right. So from the underhand guard, I'm basically standing like this. You think of it similar to dagger, but a medieval dagger. You see, this kind of guard is really, really common in medieval dagger. And the stance is basically the same. From here, there is, again, the obvious attack of just thrusting. And all I do is bring my hand forward. But one of the things I can do when I'm not in somewhere with a ceiling, or at least somewhere with a very high ceiling, is I can actually raise my hand as I do this to get a big angle. This guard facilitates a lot more close range action. And even back to the dagger analogy, I can shorten my spear and stab down. And I can come in very, very vertically over the shield in a lower ceiling. So yeah, it's just a very simple stab. The other thing I do want to make sure when I do this is I'm bringing my hand through my shield. I don't want to let my hand stretch out past the rim of my shield because then my hand will be attacked. It'll get chopped off. And even if it doesn't happen every time, once my opponent knows that I'll do that, they'll start hunting for it, because this is not a good place to be. So from here, thrust, 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 and thrust. All right, and the other thing that I can do from here that's quite useful is I can use this as a lever to grapple with. I can do the exact same motions in the overhand grip with the butt of the spear, but I find the weight of the spearhead gives me a bit of extra impetus and makes it a better option. And also it's a bit less awkward to then do follow-up movements. So what I do is I basically aggressively bind. I'm coming down and I'm hooking. unhooking, I can use that to hook over a shield to pull it open and then come in. And again, the Underhand Grip is really good for this close work. I can also use this, I can use this defensively if someone is coming in. If someone is coming in, I can use this to clear, to push, to bind their weapons with my spear, and then bind them with my shield and come in. I find as well, when you're trying to get the tip online from this position, trying to get the tip to here clears the weapons, your opponent's weapons, a lot better than trying to do it with the butt and then sweep all the way around, because that can actually knock your opponent's weapons back up. So from here, bind. Bind. It's not so good a technique in a confined space. Bind. Bind and bind. This is a very, very good kind of technique if you're the sort of person who likes to grapple. So yeah, those are your primary attacks, primary from both grips and both guards, spear and shield. And that's kind of, what I kind of came to after playing with it with full targets a lot. I found actually with full targets, spear and shield is freaking awesome. When you can hit someone anywhere, including stabbing to the face, the spear becomes a lot more deadly in one-to-one combat. When I first started reenactment, there was kind of this idea that spears were for mass combat because you could blindside your enemy with the reach of the weapon, but for one-on-one combat off a skirmishing, you wanted a sword or an axe. And then we added it, and then we started doing it in fencing masks. And as it turns out, stabbing straight to the face, really effective. Also, because there are a lot of reenactment groups that don't allow shots from the knee down, stabbing straight to leg and even covering with your shield and stabbing to the leg is really effective. And the other point I want to cover, actually, that kind of came up before, is why you don't do this sort of thing where you hold your shield against your body and stick your arm out, or even, stick your arm out past your shield. Basically, anything that is out here is in the danger zone. And particularly with a spear, you don't have any native protection for your hand from the weapon. It's not like, even a cross-hilted sword, the cross provides a fair degree of protection for your hand, let alone like a basket-hilted sword or, a saber, like those ones back there. So if you have a habit of doing this, of like leaving your hand out, someone will take advantage of it. They will see it and they will take advantage. And one of the drills that I get people to do when I'm doing spear and shield as a starting drill is one person does this. I deliberately don't make it a false stab. It's just a, hey, hit me kind of motion. And the other person practices thrusting with their spear to take advantage. And once you get a lot of accuracy with a spear, even against another spear, this sort of thing becomes really dangerous. And this sort of thing becomes really suicidal. So yeah, that's kind of, which really is something that kind of only comes up when you can regularly target forearms, which is why, at least for me, it came up, looking at spear and shield from a HEMA perspective. All right, so before we move on, are there any questions or comments? Like I said, I mean, it's hard to not sound a bit authoritative when you're teaching, and doubly so when you're a professional teacher and habitually sound authoritative. But you guys can just turn around and be like, oh no, this thing totally does work if you do it this way. I'm not. So if you do have any comments, please throw them down. And I'm going to drink some water.
Well, my main practice with a shorter spear, like the assegai, they use a shield to push the opponent in and then come underneath it.
Yeah.
I also use short spear techniques based on bayonet.
Yeah, the Zulus. Yeah, they were like doing spear and shield. You realize exactly why, exactly the genius of the assegai and what Shaka Zulu came up with.
And it's documented with what they did. So that's the other part. You say it's accurately. It's technically accurate.
Yeah. Yeah. No. It's I did actually look at Zulu warfare a bit when I was interested in Viking Age warfare. Not because I think there's anything more than a pragmatic similarity, but there is that pragmatic similarity where having a short weapon and coming in with a really short weapon, aggressively with a really short weapon, is really, really practical when people have got a really long spear. And I kind of think like in the Viking Age, like Saxes, little sort of machete type things were quite popular weapons. And I kind of wonder if that was a similar kind of like a convergent evolution thing where people had the same problem, so they came to a similar solution where they're like, all right, I'm going to get a short weapon and just come in and get all jibbity jabbity. But yeah,
Well, I suppose if you're raiding in a house or a closed environment, a church, a castle, whatever, it's limited amounts of space. You can't spin a long weapon around. You've got to have a short weapon to be direct.
Yeah, well, it's actually I definitely, and actually it was I'm trying to find this book. It might be a little dated because Macquarie University's medieval section in their library was from when they had medieval studies, which medieval studies ended at Macquarie about 2 years before I started. So they didn't quite make it into the 21st century, but all this stuff was, all their books were quite, even by then were quite old. But one of these books was saying that based on artistic depictions, what it looks like is in the earlier part of the Viking Age, the spear and shield was the most common weapon combination. But as raiding particularly intensified, people started to prefer axes. And it's probably for that reason, is if they're getting in tight and they're getting in close, they want a shorter weapon that they can use. Like especially if they're raiding, they're like inside in monasteries or in houses and stuff like that. Because you saw it tonight. Like, how many times did I smack something with the shield in what is a very large open room? You can only imagine like what if there are church pews? What if there's a dinner table? What if there's like, because in a lot of like Dark Age or Viking Age buildings, thatched roofs, they have a big fire right in the middle of the building. Your spear would get quite tangled up, which I guess kind of goes back to that thing that I keep bringing up about how I want to try all this stuff in confined spaces. But yeah, that's future dreams. Cool. So if there's no other comments or questions,
can I ask a question? Yes. Hi.
Definitely go for
sorry
it.
for
Please
dropping
do.
in the middle. Time zones can be a bitch. Greetings from the Netherlands, by the way. I'm
thank you. Welcome aboard.
As a HEMA practitioner and early medieval archaeologist, I'm quite interested in weapon design. So I was wondering about your thoughts on some things. Like, have you experimented with winged spears yet?
No, unfortunately I haven't. I know, actually very briefly, we had a guy who came to the Dark Age Society who had a wing spear, and he'd put a lot of research into getting the shaft like the right dimensions. And he thought it was really cool because he's like, when you're in traditional reenactors, like when you're a shield wall, you can reach over the shield wall and use the wings to pull open the spears and then stab people. And I'm like, that's really, really cool. Can I have a look? And I grabbed it. And I grabbed it with, I was holding my shield at the time. I immediately dropped my spear and started using it more like a glaive, just because to my mind, the way it's balanced and with the wings in it and the length of the spearhead, and like the historical ones I've seen in the Danish National Museum, all had that kind of blade profile. It just felt more like a partisan, the Renaissance partisan.
Yeah, fair enough.
I've not done any substantial.
I've got one here. Like, this is just a small reenactment one, but those wings, when you're binding with it, I haven't experimented a lot with it either, but Yeah, for interpersonal combat, using those wings to bind with it would just be amazing, even if you're using it one-handed.
Yeah.
Some other questions I had with your spear, have you considered either hacking and slashing with the spear, even if it's one-handed?
One hand. So I'm going to have to take my earpiece out so I won't be able to hear you until I put it back in. I'm going to get up to demo this because I'm going to need a lot of space. I find, this is a very light spear, and I deliberately got a light one. When I was doing reenactment, I wanted a light spear so I had a lot of control on it, so I didn't stab someone in the face accidentally. And then when I started fighting with it in a HEMA context, I found that a light one-handed spear is really good. I find to actually, to get enough force to get a good swing with it takes a big movement. And that isn't to say that they wouldn't have done it. This is going to be interesting. Doing big swinging kind of movements for maybe for crowd control or something, or to stop people from circling on you could be successful. But I find when a weapon gets over a certain length, it's not that they can't cut in terms of power, rapiers can obviously cut, but the amount of torque, the amount of force you need to break through the inertia of the length caused by the length of the blade makes them quite bad for cutting. And to give you a sense of what I'm talking about, this is my rapier. It's long and wobbly, which is great for thrusting. It's very safe. But if I cut with this, it's a big movement that smacks up my roof. But it's a big, slow movement because the blade is so long. Whereas if I get my nice handy arming sword, and I do basically the same movement, it's a really quick movement just because the blade is shorter. And if I got a shorter sword again, it would be even quicker. Because I don't have, the longer the tip of the weapon, the more inertia you have to overcome. So I find that one-handed spears are not very good for cutting. Two-handed spears, because you have the leverage of the other hand and a lot more power, means you can cut with them more effectively. But I'm not the thing I found about it is it's very slow, I guess. It's very slow. I could see reasons to do it. Especially if you were surrounded by a group of people and you wanted to basically keep them to back off, just swinging the thing around your head could be reasonably effective. But I wouldn't do it in one-to-one combat against another spear because it's a big, slow movement, I guess. That's kind of my thoughts on it.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. The other thing I experimented with was basically with you call it the underhand spear, just spear sliding it, just throwing it. Have you experimented with that as well? Or have you tried?
Yeah, so sliding it through the hand. I found, I experimented with a bit. I found that it was good for catching people off guard because they'd expect, a lot of people got used to the idea that the underhand grip had a shorter reach. I found, it works fine. I find it's a good way of making a long attack. I find the fact that you have to wait for the weapon to slide makes the attack a little slower, but it's still a good reach thing. I also sometimes would turn my spear into a javelin and throw it, particularly if I found in one-on-one combat that didn't work so well because people would have time to react to it, but in group combat, or just skirmishes and stuff, 3-on-3, sort of 2-on-2 or 3-on-3 sort of battles, it was a good way to catch people off guard, was to throw your spear and kind of hit them when they thought that they were out of reach. Most of my take on the underhand grip is more a product of my person. I think this is actually something very important to remember. When you ask a HEMAist to come up with a system for a particular weapon, their preferences are going to very, very greatly affect how they approach that weapon. And as a fighter, or when I'm using weapons, I prefer to fight close, or I prefer to have the capacity to come in. So for me, being able to come down and bind or come down over the top of a shield was more useful than being able to extend my reach, just because I found that's just my preference for fighting. But it's all like, I found it works. I found that you kind of want to be careful what simulators you're using, because you can generate a lot of power doing that. And if you've got like with that, I mean, that spear, even's got a big, nice round nipple at the top, so it's fairly safe. It's not very flexible, so you have to be a bit careful with it. But yeah, that's what I found. I know if you want to share some of your experiences with the weapons as well. But yeah, I found it's a useful thing to do. It's just when I do an underhand grip, I tend to do it specifically. I tend to do it because I want to close. But that's more a reflection of me than of anything to do with either the weapons or like the mechanics of the weapon.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Thank you. The other thing that I did notice, but I hadn't commented on it early because I dropped in halfway through your Sword and Shield, was your actual shield. I don't know if you discussed it earlier, if you've, because I see some of the shields behind you, why you chose this one to demonstrate it. I mean, it looks a bit tiny, but I can understand from a teaching perspective that you'd like to use a tinier shield to make it more visible to the other participants here.
Yeah, I mean, there was a bit of that. Yeah, it's probably at, actually, I don't, the rate. I know with Viking shields, the ones that have been found have all tended to be towards the big end. With Anglo-Saxon shields, there's like a massive range, like a massive difference in the diameter. Although they're also looking at shield. The books I was reading on that were looking at shields from like a 700-year period or something or from the like the migration period after the fall of the Western Empire, all the way up to sort of the 10th, 11th century. So that might have skewed things a bit. But the main reason I chose this one is not so much the size, even though it's actually the grip. The grip on this is flat, which means that I've got really good control over the weapon. Whereas the bigger shield, my really big shield that is, for that, the grip is a tree branch. I might quickly actually run up and grab it so you can all see. But yeah, the actual grip for that is a branch that the person who made the blank found by the side of the road. So it's fairly round. And what I find with the round grips is I don't have quite the same level of control. And I've already embarrassed myself enough by dropping my spear after saying, do it this way so you don't drop your spear. I do want to also not have control over my as much control over my shield, which is why I chose certainly a slightly smaller shield than I might have otherwise used. But yeah, I do have different sizes of shields for different experimentation. And I primarily chose this one more because the grip gives me the best control. And from memory, and again, it's been a while since I looked into this, of the shields found, most had flat or like rectangular grips, also almost rectangular grips, more like a sword grip than round ones like people didn't just get a tree branch and use that basically. If I remember correctly, although it's been a while since I looked into it, and also I'm a historian rather than an archaeologist, so material culture is not my specialty. I guess.
No, fair enough. I think I know the article about Anglo-Saxon Shields you're referring to, and in that article they made the correlation between shield size and age of the individual that was in the grave. So kids had smaller shields, whilst that the adults still had the shield of 90 centimeters of diameter. And in terms of shield grips, that can be very, very annoying. So in that case, fair enough that you're using this shield. I find that having a shield grip that's octagonal does tend to help a lot with just the grip. So it's still round, but you just plane a few strips on it. And I think that's also what happened with the shield from Trelleborg. The Society for Combat Archaeology also published an article a few months back about all the surviving shield fragments from Scandinavia, or at least most of them. So if you want to learn more about shields, I highly recommend that article.
Yeah, I'll post that one too. I've got that article on my to read list. I intended to get around to it before this the workshop, and I just had a really busy week. But you know, I've skimmed
fair
it.
Enough. But good. Yeah. But at least thank you for answering my questions, and I'm sorry for everybody else for taking up so much time.
Don't apologize. Those were great questions. That was fantastic. Yeah.
Can I jump in on his question?
Yeah, go for it.
The boar spear. There were documented evidence of people forcing themselves up a saber to kill the person with the saber or with the bayonet. Do you then think that the lugs on the boar spear, and when you say it's a boar spear, came as a result of combat use or as a result of boar hunting, and it just switched over nicely between the two? There's a co-development as opposed to one and used in the other.
Yeah, I don't know. You'd have to look at the development of spears. The problem is we don't actually know what spears were used for. So it's a wonderful article. Very recently, they actually found a whole Viking Age spear in a glacier. So as the apocalypse happens, all of the glaciers are melting, and you know, the upside of this is there's all this stuff that was buried in the glaciers and preserved perfectly is now sort of being unearthed. I was reading through the article basically talking about that. One of the things they said is they're like, we don't know if this was a hunting spear or a war spear, or if they're used for both, or if it was used for both. And you see a similar sort of comment about spearheads when they're found in graves, where people are like, there's not a lot of spearheads that are found. There's no indication of their purpose based on the size and dimensions, because we don't know if they were javelins. We don't know if they were stabbing spears. We don't know if there was something that was used for both, which I actually suspect that a lot of one-handed spears were, were just intended for a variety of purposes. I mean, my spear, even though I wouldn't throw that spear in a mock fight, but that spear does throw quite well. So I think the short answer is I don't know, and I don't like to guess because I don't feel like that's something we reasonably could know. I mean, you could make arguments certainly with like the Viking berserkers that they might have run up a spear. It might have been a more regular occurrence because there were people who were, just off their face aggressive who would keep coming. And there's certainly a lot of historical records of the berserkers suggest that they don't die from one wound, or they don't die straight away because berserking. But yeah, I don't know. There might it might even be that wing spears just started because people started taking it. People just took their boar spears to war because they only had the one spear. I think even linguistically we don't have any clues, because there are different types of spears in Old Norse. Like the one weapon where we have different terms for it are spears, where there's a word for spear. There's a word for what's termed a hewing spear, which we don't know what that, we don't necessarily know what that was. And there's another type of spear, if I remember correctly. But yeah, even then, it might just be that people took their boar. We don't know if they considered hunting with spear, or hunting the spears you use for hunting as needing to be distinct from the spears you use for war. And actually, I think Anna Coates mentioned with when he was talking about cavalry, that knights, when they trained, would often use war weapons to go hunting with, to get used to handling the weapons and killing with the weapons. So yeah, the more I think about it, the more I can think about it, the more possibilities I can think of. So yeah, I don't think I can answer that question.
I know I know you also mentioned hooking the tip of the lug over the shield and pulling down, which would be like the use of the long axe. If you look at the long axe, or the long weapons, the long shafted weapons that we use, like the pole arms, that most of them hooking had a hook, whereas the boar spear the lugs are virtually straight. I mean, it would do the job, but I just wonder, it's just...
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
If I can hook in on this one, if you'll allow me.
Oh, definitely. With a pun like that, go ahead. Thank you kindly.
if.
Yeah, go.
Yeah. In Dutch and Northwestern archaeology, in terms of, hunting spears versus war spears, in German archaeology, they've made a kind of an arbitrary border based on the socket diameter of the spears. If it's greater than 40 millimeters, it's a hunting spear, and if it's less, then it's a war spear.
So how many millimeters?
Sorry?
What was the diameter? You mentioned the actual number?
40 millimeters, so 4 centimeters. So if it's bigger than that, it's a hunting spear. If it's shorter, it's a war spear. But I find that line a bit ambiguous. I'm not really sure about it. Need to do more research into that. And in terms of the way the hooks or on the wings are oriented, towards the tip, they're straight, but they're always flaring down. So it's not really a great hook. I mean, in this modern reproduction, it's already it's actually quite a hook, but in most archaeological examples, it's a lot more smooth going down, like a semicircle. So you can't hook with that. So I think it's mainly directed at things coming from the tip down, and that it's aimed to stop.
Thanks, Mark.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also, I do know of a few examples in which there's actually weapon damage, like a sword cut or some sort of cut visible on the wings of a spear. So, but then again, saying, just a chop. But then saying if it's if that distinction is feasible, even if it's still a hunting spear, you can still use it in one-on-one combat, even if it's not an official war situation. It's still a weapon. Same with the saxes or axes.
I was going to say, like, it's definitely the saxes, but also like the axes that they used, even though they're thinner and lighter, are like they're actually like a lot of frontier axes that you see in the American, also the Australian frontier, that were used for more fine chopping. So you have like a big tree felling axe to chop the tree down, and then when you want to carve it up with the axe, you use a much thinner axe that is identical to the types they have that were taken to war, basically. So yeah, I mean, like there's one of the things that there's kind of this interesting bias in archaeology, and this is something that as a HEMA practitioner we have to be very mindful of, is that we have distinctions that historical people may not have. So we would distinguish between like a hunting knife and a fighting knife, but they may not have. We distinguish between activities. One thing that will, like, as a kind of a cultural history thing as well, as far as we know, they didn't have a concept of jobs in the modern sense, like, in the way that I'm a teacher, or like someone is a manager, or like bar staff or something like that. Whereas in Scandinavia, the way they talk about things is they talk about people, activities that people do, and there's this kind of this expectation that it's a bit, and it's almost a bit strange that a person has a single activity that they do, even for like very highly specialized crafts. So your average, Scandinavian in the period, your average anyone in the period was, did some woodworking, did some sewing, did maybe a bit of leatherworking, and sure, you have there are skills that people don't have. Like not everyone was a boat builder, or not everyone was a blacksmith, but they don't have this idea. They don't have this idea of specialization of profession. That's something that kind of appears in the Middle Ages, and so you have a people who maybe don't even think in terms of specialization the way we do. So like if we brought back the glaciers. If we found a couple of Vikings who'd been in the glaciers and somehow survived the thawing out process, which is actually very scientifically improbable, they might come back and they might be very, very confused by our way, or they might be very confused by our ways of classifying people and things in terms of specialization. So yeah, it's a difficult thing to answer because we don't, and this also goes back to the problem of we don't have very many sources from a Scandinavian perspective. We actually don't know a lot about how they viewed the world, and yeah, it's a sort of, it's a bit of a hard one, I guess. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. So, are there any other questions or comments? I might just pause recording now before anyone asks, just quickly.